All right, I think we should go ahead and get started. So what we have on the agenda for tonight is we are going to talk about the joy and wonder that is MLA. And I know that you all are just super, super, super excited to learn all the fun and exciting things to do in writing research papers and doing fun, exciting research papery type stuff. It's going to be awesome. You're just going to love it. All right. So the other thing is that, as Joe was saying, if you haven't yet done the Chapter 1 assignments, that'll be part of what your homework is to do your Chapter 1 assignments, because you have to do your Chapter 1 assignments in addition to the Chapter 2 assignments. So in class today, we're going to do the Access Granted research paper, and then we are going to, for homework, it is the research paper that is on page 131. It is called Mobile Device Protection. So mobile device protection is what the homework is. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing that I wanted to tell you about this is that in addition to the book and the material that's in the book, in your Canvas, there is a section in your Canvas called Pages. And how about if I turn on the screen? Here we go. So in Canvas, there's a section called Pages, and in Pages, there I have a bunch of helpful extra material that you are expected to read and know about. We'll talk more about all of these throughout the semester, but the one that I wanted to point out today is this one, which is the research paper resources.
If somebody comes looking for it, he can write the link. I was supposed to be.
Yeah. Okay. So this, the research paper resources is a fantastic set of resources for writing any kind of paper. So the type of paper that we're going to write today is, or that we're going to be formatting today is the MLA format. MLA tends to be what most English teachers and most humanities teachers require. Sometimes you'll find that other places also require the MLA standard, so that's why we're using the MLA. But other ones that people use are the APA style. That tends to be for more medically driven type documents, tend to be done in the APA style. And my personal favorite is the Chicago style. So I'll show you briefly why Chicago just rocks. Because Chicago Turabian, oh, I love Chicago Turabian. But we're not going to do Chicago Turabian today. We're going to do MLA. But if you just can't get enough of this, because I mean, you know, who wouldn't love to do nothing but, you know, MLA and Chicago and APA and AMA all the time? I've included links to the places where they talk about the different stuff and why, you know, where it's useful and what it's all about and how to cite a source. So this is all about Chicago. But today, the one that we're going to talk about is the MLA style. So here's, you know, everything that you could possibly want to know about MLA and all of the rules that are inside of MLA and all of that kind of stuff. The other thing that I wanted to point out is just that the OWL website in general is the best website for going if you ever have to write any kind of paper. Any kind of paper whether it is a scientific paper, whether it is a creative writing paper, whether it is a research paper for history, if it's an art class, whatever. English.purdue.edu/OWL. Purdue University, the Purdue Online Writing Lab is just spectacularly awesome. I cannot say enough good things about them. They have, over on the left-hand side on here, they have stuff about general writing to help you with general writing things. So if you're, stuff about common writing assignments and understanding what your teacher really wants you to do in a when writing, when the teacher gives you an assignment, how to write an argument paper versus a research paper versus an exploratory paper. I cannot say enough good things about this website. They are fantastic, and it is all totally 100% free. There's no charge for going there and looking at what they have, and they have videos on how to do all of this stuff, and I mean it's fantastic. So absolutely, if take advantage of the fact that Purdue University does this, because it's pretty awesome. So again, it's OWL for Online Writing Lab.english.purdue.edu, and then that should actually direct you to their main page, but you can also just click onto it by going to My Pages and then clicking onto it. It is absolutely fantastic. And then of course the official APA rules are at APA style, and the official MLA rules are at style.mla.org, and the official Chicago is at chicagomanualofstyle.org, and the official AMA is at the AMA Manual of Style. AMA is also one that people in the medical field often have to follow because, well, AMA, American Medical Association. Both the APA, which is the psychiatrists and psychologists, sometimes they have to do it in the AMA style as well as in the APA style. So anyway, talk more about that later. But today we're going to play around with MLA using the Access Granted assignment. So what I would like you to do is in your booklet, or rather in your chapter, if you turn to page, 69, and that is where we're going to start, which is to open up Microsoft Word, and then once you have Microsoft Word open, that we are again creating a blank document. So I'm sorry? Is there oh, yeah. All right, so the first thing that that we need to do is we need to change the style of our document. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about styles in a little bit, but for the moment, I just want you to go through and change the style of Microsoft Word in the normal style here. And by default, Microsoft Word assumes that you want to write everything in Calibri font, size 11, with like 1.5 or something like that. What is it? 1.08 line spacing with 8 points before the style. That's the default. That's what happens when you fire up your Microsoft Word and start working on it. That's the default. The problem is that the MLA, and for that matter, Chicago, and for that matter, APA and AMA, all of them require or prefer Times New Roman, size 12, with single spacing, and so in order to, double spacing rather, with no space above or below the content. So the bad way of doing that is to do what is called direct formatting. And we kind of alluded to direct formatting last week. Direct formatting is when you type in some stuff. So if I just type in some fake stuff, 5 and 10. So here's my fake stuff that I have on here. The bad way of changing the format is the way that everybody does it, which is they select the text, and then they go on to font, and then they go to the font they want to change it to, and then they go and they change the font size, and if they want to change the paragraph, they change the paragraph, and this is the way that everybody does it. This is not the way to do it. And the reason this is not the way to do it is that if you do it that way, you're only going to be able to manipulate and change that section that you were changing. And it won't default to being the new way of doing it. And if after a while your boss or your teacher or your friend or whatever says, you know, I really liked that, but could you change the font to something else? Well, you have to go in and change absolutely everything. Whereas if you change your style, it's all done at once. So I'm going to undo everything I just did, and we're going to do it the right way. So the right way of doing this is on page 70. So on page 70, there down at the bottom, it says to modify a style. And to modify a style, what you want to do is over here in the styles area, you'll notice that it has a bunch of styles here. There's normal and no spacing and heading and title and subtitle. It turns out there's even more. If you clicked onto the more button, you'd actually see that there's even more. But the style that we want to modify is the style that is called normal. So to change normal, what we're going to do is we're going to right click on normal, and we're going to go down to where it says modify. So you want to click on the right mouse button and then choose modify with the left mouse button. And what you want to do is where it has the font that they want us to change this to is, again, Times New Roman, because we're doing this in the MLA style. So we want this to become Times New Roman, and we want this to be size 12. So Times New Roman size 12 is the font that we want. Now, the book is going to tell you that you should change the line spacing later and remove space after the paragraph later, and I think that is the wrong way of doing it. So in the book, on pages 72 and 73, they are going to show you a way of doing it that I don't agree with. Or to be more precise, there's nothing wrong really with doing it that way, but the better way is to modify it in the modify style area, as opposed to changing it and then telling the computer match what I just changed to the new default. And so the better way of doing this is after you have changed to Times New Roman size 12, down here at the bottom where it says format, you want to click onto format, and when you click onto format, you want to then click onto paragraph. So you want to click on the format and then paragraph, and that will bring up the paragraph settings. And in the paragraph settings, we want to change the spacing from saying 8 point after to saying 0 point after. And where it says line spacing, we want line spacing to be double. And then click OK, and click OK. And what that does is that now changes what normal means for this document. Now, if you are writing, or rather, if you are doing a lot of papers and on your own machine, I would strongly advise you to perhaps make this be the default for Microsoft Word. For this classroom, you don't have to do that, although you absolutely can, because we have Deep Freeze installed, and so it will wipe everything and it will go back to the original state as soon as we restart it. But if you wanted to change the style to be permanent, then what you would want to do is you would want to, in your styles, you would want to save that as down here when we say modify, when we said modify style. So again, when you go and you right click onto the style and you go down to modify, down here at the bottom, it currently says only in this document. If you want it to be permanent, and it will always then be Times New Roman size 12 double spacing, then you'd want to say new documents based on this template. And if you set it to new documents based on this template, then it means that the next time you create a new document, by default, it would be Times New Roman size 12 double spaced. So if you're writing lots of papers and your teachers usually want you to do either MLA or Chicago or AMA or APA, then I would strongly advise you to set that to be your default across everything. For this class, if you want to, you can. If you don't want to, you can just keep it at only this document. It's up to you. Questions or problems? All right, so I'm going to stop for a moment and go back to what I was telling you before, and that is that in Pages, there are a bunch of other pages that are really, really cool. And one of those things that's really, really cool is a page that I call Styles versus Direct Formatting. And I have it set up so that you can look at it forever on your own. But I want to go over the things that are on this. So I'm about to do everything that is in here. So if you want to skip ahead and see what I'm doing, you can skip ahead and see what I'm doing. But I'm going to actually create this, and I'm going to do this in a different document so I don't mess up the current document. So if you're working on something else, I want you to stop for a moment and just look up at my screen so I can show you what I am talking about. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create some fake content. And I'm going to call this, say, chapter 1. And I'm going to call this like chapter 2. And I'm going to call this like chapter 3. And I'm going to call this chapter 4. Chapter 4. And then chapter 5. So here is my totally awesome, way cool document that I'm sending off to my publishers because I just wrote the best book ever, and so here it is. But they want it to be formatted a particular way, right? So I go in on the chapter style, the chapter here, and I use the bad way of doing it, which is, again, direct formatting. And I'm going to do that I want this to be in Algerian and size 28, and I'll make this be in Algerian and size 28, and I'll make this be in Algerian, and I think I made it 28, but I actually made it 36, and then I do Algerian, and I think I did 28, but I actually did 26. So here is the problem with doing direct formatting. Problem with doing direct formatting is that it is way too easy to accidentally not format your document the way that you expected that you had formatted your document. So I intended this to be Algerian 28, Algerian 28. I intended that to be Algerian 28, but it's not. I intended that to be Algerian 28, but it's not. Now, you might look at this and say, well, of course, you'd see right away, chapter 3 is not there. Well, all right, what if chapter 1 is on one page, and then I insert a blank page? I didn't mean to do a blank page. I meant to do a page break. So insert a page break, insert a page break. So unless you're paying attention, you may not notice that chapter 1 and chapter 2 and chapter 3 and chapter 4 are not all the same font. Because if all you're looking at is chapter 3, then, well, of course, chapter 3 is bigger than the regular font. But you might not notice it when you're actually working on it. So there are several problems with direct formatting, and that's one of them. The other problem with direct formatting is that if you do direct formatting, then it's not only is it too easy to accidentally mess up what you wanted to be there, it's also too difficult to go back and fix everything. Because let's say I sent this off to my editors, and my editors look at my paper and they say, great job, we love your content, everything is great, but I can't have you use the Algerian font. Could you please use a much more, a more professional looking font? So I say, all right. So I go back and I have to now change chapter 1 and chapter 2 and chapter 3 and chapter 4 and chapter 5. And if I have 100 chapters, all 100 chapters. I have to go through on each one and make 100 changes. It's a much better way of doing it. Much better way of doing it is to use styles. So if I did this in styles instead, I'd make chapter 1, say, a heading 1 style. And then I make chapter 2 a heading 1 style. And then chapter 3 a heading 1 style. And then chapter 4 a heading 1 style. And then chapter 5 a heading 1 style. And now that I've made these all heading 1 styles, now what I can do is I can go back to heading 1, right click on a heading 1, or if you're on a Mac, you could do command click or control click, or you could use a mouse that has a right mouse button. And I could do modify. And when I do modify, I change what I want to change it from. So I want to change it from Calibri to something more professional. So these days, my favorite font is a font called Chiller. Nothing screams professionalism quite like Chiller. Chiller is awesome. Now I'm kidding. Don't actually write that down. Oh. Chiller is, you will see why I was kidding in just a moment. So I will change this to say, red, and then I'll make it like bold, and then I'll make it like, say, size 72, and then I'll click OK. And so, now I've got my chapters in the much more professional chapter style. And if I don't, one of the things that I might want to do is I might actually want to have every chapter be on its own page, right? So instead of having to insert page breaks on every page when I want a new page break, I can just make it so that every time I use heading 1, that it will be on its own page. So to do that, I'd right click onto my heading 1, I go down to modify. When I go down to modify, I go down to format. When I go down to format, I go to paragraph. This might look familiar because I just had you go into this section. And instead of being in the indents and spacing and changing the space before and space after and so on, if I go to line breaks, there is a section that says page break before. And if I click page break before, and I click OK, and I click OK to accept it, now every chapter is on its own page. And if I wanted to change the default font from being, again, from being Calibri to, say, Times New Roman, I could change it to Times New Roman, size maybe 16, click OK, and now everything is Times New Roman 16. And so this way, I can quickly modify not just one section of the paper, but the entire paper, all in a few keystrokes or a few mouse clicks. And that really is why, generally speaking, Styles is better than direct formatting. And so I strongly recommend that before you take, say, the Word midterm or the final, that you reread the section on here, because I'll bet there's probably a question or two that's on this. Just suggesting, might possibly be. All right, back to what we're doing. So that's why styles are so important, because you can quickly modify the look and feel of your entire document all at once. Now, as I said last week, if what you're doing is creating just a one-pager, you're just creating a flyer or whatever, then maybe going through the hassle of creating a style might not be the best choice, because you only have one page. So you might only have one or two things that you're changing, and the time it takes to actually create the styles might not be worth it. On the other hand, if you're going to create lots of flyers and you're basically going to use the same template on every flyer, well then absolutely you should do styles instead of direct formatting. All right. Any questions about that? Okie dokie. So what we want to do next is on page 74. And what we want to do is we want to create a header. So to create the header, the way to create the header is to double click inside of the header region, or you can do like what the book says. And what the book says to do is to click on Insert, and then when you're on Insert, to go to the header and footer tools, and then insert the header, or rather go into header rather, and then click on to Edit Header, and that will then take you into the header area. Personally, I prefer to double click. So if you double click in the main area, it takes you back to the main document. If you put your mouse up in the header area and you double click, you will be in the header region. But again, if you're having trouble figuring out how to do the double click method, you can always click on the Insert, and then you can go over to Header and Footer, click on a header, and then click on to Edit Header. And that will then take you to Edit Header as well. For those of you who are Mac users, at this point, it's done exactly the same way. It's done exactly the same way. You just double click into the header, or you go on Insert, and then when you go into Insert, you can then go into the header and footer area, click on the header, click on the Edit Header, and it will take you to the header area. Now then, you will notice that if you go back into the home, that it now says Times New Roman size 12. That's because we changed what the default font was. So one of the problems that people often have when writing a MLA or Chicago or an APA paper, and they've used the direct the direct formatting method of styling their document, is that they forget to style the header and they forget to style the footer if there's a footer. But because we changed the overall scheme, it should be at Times New Roman size 12. All right. So in a in a MLA style. The MLA style says that the first thing on every page should be your last name and the page number that you are currently on. So those are the two things that are supposed to be on in the header on every page. So to do this, what you want to do is in your header, you want to click onto the align right, or again, the keyboard shortcut is Control-R. You can do Control-R. And then you want to put in your last name. Now, if you want to do it exactly the way the book is doing it, the book is being written by a guy named something Bailey, Robert Bailey, Teddy Bailey. If you want to be Teddy Bailey, that's fine. If you want to be the real you, that's fine. If you have a hyphenated name, put in both of the hyphenated names. If your name has two words in it, like you are named, Ralph Von Stinky Boy, you would put in VON space Stinky Boy. In my case, I'm Mark Branham, so I'm going to do Branham. After you do that, you want to put in a space, and then you want to insert the page number. Now, here's where things are totally different if you are a Mac user versus a Windows user. If you are a Windows user, it's pretty easy. If you're a Windows user, and we're all using Windows machines in the class, so I'll show you how to do that first. All you need to do is when you are in your header, note that there is now a green button up here that says Header and Footer Tools. Click onto that, and then over here where it says Header and Footer, there's a thingy that says Page Number. Click on a page number, and then go down to where it says Current Position, and then go down to where it says Plain Number. So page number, current position, plain number, and then click. And that is how you would insert it on a Windows machine. Now, if so again, insert, page number, current position, and then plain number is what you want. Now, just to show you that this is happening, if I go back to my regular document part and I just put in some fake text, don't do this. You'll notice that it now says on page 13, Branham 13. And on page 12, it says Branham 12. And it says Branham 11, and so on. So just wanted to show you that when you do, when you put your name, a space, and then the page number by inserting the page number, that it will do that. If you are on a Mac, what you have to do is kind of convoluted. What you have to do if you are on a Mac is that, and I don't even think there's an equivalent button on Windows. I don't think that they even have the equivalent button on here. What you have to do is you have to click on, in the header and footer area, there's a button called Field. And you click onto Field, and then you scroll down to the field that is called page num, I think is what it's called. Or page ref, maybe it's page ref. Page ref. Or is it page? No, it's just page. My mistake. It's just page. So you do page, and then it will insert the correct page. So that's what you have to do on the Mac. All right. So to close the header, again, if you are in the header, one of the ways to close the header is to click the button that says Close Header, or you can double click inside of the main part of the document. Either way. All right. Page 78. So anytime you're writing a research paper, there needs to have the contact information for the person who's writing the paper. So you have to have you have to have all of the information about you. And the way that you do this in MLA style is that in the MLA style, you need to put in, on the first line, you need to put in your name. So again, if you're doing it exactly like the book is doing it, they're calling it Teddy Bailey. In my case, I am going to do me, Mark Branham. There we go. The second thing that that you need to do is on the second line. So again, to get to the second line, just press enter or return. And on the second line, you need to put in the, if this is a MLA paper for a class, you need to put in the teacher's name. If this is for a, for like a conference, then you would put in the conference name. If it's for a publication, you put in the publication name. Whatever it is that you're sending it to, whoever the person is, or whoever the organization is, or whoever the person is, that's what you put in the next line. So in the book, they call it Miss Pedro. In our class, it's for, you know, me. So I would do like Professor Mark Branham. You could put in, you know, Professor Branham. You could put in Mr. B. You put in Mr. Mark. Those are all things that I but not Mr. Branham. That was my dad. My dad was Mr. Branham. Whenever I take my daughter, you know, like on a school trip or whatever, and they make you put in a name or whatever, I always say, you can call me Mr. B. You know? So, anyway, all right. All right, so we got that. You know, if sometimes professors prefer to be like, you know, prof. As I said last time, the biggest mistake that people make in writing anything is not paying attention to their target audience. So in the case of a paper, who is the target audience? The professor, right? So what you want to do is you want to find out from the teacher how they prefer to be referred to. And whatever they prefer to be referred to, that's what you want to put in on line 2. And the way you find out is, you know, one of the ways to find out would be just to look at their syllabus. They probably say on the syllabus how, you know, whatever, if they say, you know, Mark Branham, you know, MA, you know, Stanford University, whatever, then okay, put that in there. I once had a boss who preferred to be his name, well, no, it was Dr. his name, comma, PhD. Because he was really proud of his PhD, I guess. But, you know, whatever it is, that's what you want to put in there. So listen to what your teacher actually wants. And then what you do is the name of the class, or again, if it's an organization, the name of the organization. So in this case, we are in computer applications, CA 100D, something like that. And then we want to put in the date. And the book is wrong. And when I say wrong, I mean the book is really, really, really wrong. The book says that the MLA style is on the side over there, they're kind of right. It says the MLA style prefers the day, month, year, or the month, day, year. The correct answer is they only prefer the day, month, year. So do not do it the way the book tells you to do it. Today would not be October 15th, 2014. If you were doing it the way the book did it, it would be 15 October 2014. But in real life, we are at 13 February 2020. Now, this date is usually not today. This date is usually the day that the assignment is due. So it would also be totally valid to put in 22 May 2020 because that's really when everything is due. The other thing is that, again, if it's for like a conference or whatever, then you would put in the date of the conference or the date that the thing is supposed to be sent to publication, whatever it is. And then what you want to do is press enter. And the next line that we put in is the title of the paper. And the title of this paper is Access Granted. Now, in the MLA style, you do not change the font of the title. You don't change the size of the font. What you do to distinguish the title from the rest of the paper is to make it centered. So to make it centered, you can, of course, click on this little guy right here, but there is a cooler, awesome way of doing it. Anybody remember the cooler, awesome way of doing it? Control E. Control E. And let's see here. The next thing is that to start writing the paper, we want to be on the next line, but the next line needs to be left justified. So to go back to left justified, you can click on the left button or again, Control L. We're on a Mac, Command L. All right, one more thing before we start actually writing his little paper, and that is that in the MLA style, this part of it is supposed to be left justified with double space, Times New Roman, etc. But the paper itself is supposed to, every paragraph is supposed to be indented by 5 spaces, by 1/2 inch. So the lame way of doing that is to hit tab every paragraph. That is not the best way of doing it. The best way of doing it is to do what is called a hanging indent. And there are 2 basic ways of doing hanging indents. There is the mousy way of doing it, and there is the clicking on the format method of doing it. And I'm going to show you both ways. So if you're adept with your mouse and you feel comfortable using your mouse, you can do the mouse method. And the mouse method is, you'll notice it up here, there are 3 little icons. There's a little icon that has an arrow pointing down. There's another icon that has a little arrow pointing up. And then below that, there is a little, rectangle. And the arrow pointing down is the left, the first line indent, the hanging indent. And to do the first line indent at 1/2 inch, I would just click and drag it to 1/2 inch. Now, the problem with doing the mouse method is that it is, I think, too easy to accidentally click on the square and drag the entire thing over 1/2 inch, because that's what the square does. The square moves the entire left indent to 1/2 inch, which is not what we want. All we want is the first line to be 1/2 inch. And by the way, the other one, the other arrow is the second line and beyond. So you can set the second line to be at 1/2 inch if you wanted to, and this to be, so that then the first line would be left indented and the rest of it would be 1/2 inch. But that's not what we want. That will be what we'll want later on, but it's not what we want right now. So clicking on the little arrow at the top and dragging it over to 1/2 inch, that's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it, and I would argue the easier way of doing it, is on Home, in Paragraph, click on the paragraph settings. Or on the Mac, it would be when you're on, you can go there by doing your format menu and then going down to paragraph. So it is, so again, I go on Home and I click on to the paragraph settings. Or again, on the Mac, I would go on the format menu, not the format toolbars, but rather on the actual menu choice. So File, Edit, View, Insert, Format. And then under Format, you can go down to Paragraph, and then you'll be at this spot. And then you'd want to be on indents and spacing. And on indents and spacing, there is a choice called indentation. And in indentation, there is a special one. And on special, if you choose first line, by default, it will do by 1/2 inch, and click OK. That will now make it so that this is 1/2 inch. And what will happen at this point then is as you're typing, and you'll go along and go along and go along and go along, is that it will indent 1/2 inch automatically. And if I press enter, it will automatically also be indented 1/2 inch. Questions, problems, concerns? Okay. All right. So the next thing that we want to do is that we actually want to start typing in our little document. So this is on page 84. And what the paper wants to say is we want it to say in the first line, it is what? Biometric devices authenticate a person's identity by verifying unique personal characteristics. these devices translate a biometric element such as a fingerprint into a code that is compared with a digital code stored on a computer. And as the book is saying that if you misspell something, it will automatically autocorrect it if it can figure that out. I'm going to talk more about autocorrect in a moment, but we'll talk more about that in a moment.
A lot of typing today, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Fun. Yay. I've done it. I did it. I've done it. Oh.
All right, once you've done that, we want to click enter to go on to the next line. And we're going to skip ahead to page 88. And the continuation is if, oh wait, no, it's not a new paragraph, my mistake. We're just continuing on writing the same paragraph. If the digital code in the computer matches the personal characteristic code, the computer grants access. Examples of biometric devices include fingerprint readers and face recognition. Now, they're telling you to misspell readers as raiders. If you want to do that, you can, and then right-click onto it and fix it. But we've already talked about misspelling words.
Yeah, be careful with spelling errors. I get an email saying when on vacation, said I'm returning on Monday, and went out, I'm retiring on Monday.
Huh.
When I came back, the dean, the vice president of the college, one of them asked me, "You're retiring?" I said, "No." And he saw the email. He told his department that I was retiring.
Yeah, that's not good.
Yeah, I don't. I did, I'm serious. When I was on vacation, I said, I'm taking up a screening committee, but I'll return on Monday to take care of it. But I said I'm retiring when I get back.
Retiring when you get back.
You didn't get it. I went to our past president.
All right, the next paragraph is again, it's also on page 88, a fingerprint reader or scanner captures curves and indentations of a fingerprint. Organizations. So if you misspell something, it's got a red squiggly line. You can right-click onto it, and if it finds it, it'll find it. You can change it, or you'd have to, if it doesn't find it, you'd have to correct it. So when you get down to the end of this sentence, where it says set up to authenticate users before they can access a computer, do not write any more than that. Don't put in a period, just stay at that point. Excuse me. Yeah.
The indent spacing, I think it's not working for her. I didn't get that.
Okay, so when we have to break, I'll come around and take a look at it.
So right now I can break.
Yeah, just keep on going for right now. Yeah.
You needed help? Needed help?
The indent spacing,
Hmm?
I didn't get that.
Click over here. Sorry. Move it. Anywhere. Hit the home key. Tap.
I'm trying so hard, but like I'm watching
Okay? Okay?
Yeah, my sister's like that. Especially kind of
Okay.
looking at.
Okay, look before you let it go.
Yeah.
Tap. Okay?
All right. So the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to put in a citation. So if you are still typing, I want you to stop because this is really, really, really important. And you can go back and fix this later on. But at this point, we need to put in a citation. And the reason that you need to put in citations is anytime that you are using somebody else's ideas, and especially anytime that you directly quote somebody. But even if you are not directly quoting them and instead you're just using their ideas, you need to cite what they said. So you need to put in and say, Mark said blah, 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 blah. And then you need to put in who, in what publication did Mark say this? Or when did Mark actually say this thingy? So that's what we need to do. Because in this case, we didn't come up with this idea on our own. We stole this idea from a person named Rossi. So that's what we need to do is we need to say, we don't have to say in the paper, according to Rossi, blah, 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 but you do need to at least cite them if you use it. If you don't, it's considered plagiarism, which is a serious academic crime, and you can get, expelled and all that kind of stuff. So it can be really bad. Now, in this case, what we want to do is we want to cite Rossi. So in order to do this, what we want to do is at the end of here, normally we would put in a period. Normally we put in a period and we'd be at the end of the sentence. But in the MLA style, what you do is you put the author's last name, and you surround the author's last name with parentheses, and then you put in the ending punctuation. However, you do not want to type it. So if you've already started putting in parentheses, delete out your parentheses because you do not want to type it. Instead, you want to tell Word that you want to insert a reference. Excuse me. And to do this, we want to put in a space because we want there to be a space between the R in computer and the open parentheses. And we want to make sure that in references that it is using MLA. So you want to make sure that that says MLA. And because we know what the citation is, because we have the book with us, or it's actually an article in a magazine, so we have the magazine with us, we want to click on where it says Insert Citation. And because it's a news source, we want to click on Add New Source. So you want to click on an Insert Citation and then Add New Source. And it'll pop up and it'll say, all right, what's the source from? And in this drop-down menu, and by the way, this is on page 90, in the drop-down menu, you want to choose, in this case, article in a periodical. So article in a periodical, meaning a magazine. And where it says author, the author's name is Rossi, Marcel Enrico. And then the title of the article is Understanding How to Use Fingerprint Readers. And the magazine was Digital Security Review. And the year was 2014. The month was August, so AUG. There was no day, so you don't put in the day. And then there were no pages, so you have two options in MLA. The old way of doing it is the way that the book is telling you to do it, which is to say n.pag or just n.p for no pages. But you can also just leave it blank. So the MLA standard allows you to not put in pages, but it also allows you to put in the no pages method. Either way is fine. So we'll do what the book says in this case, NPAG. And then the medium is that it was a web page. So we say medium was web. There's another button on here that says show all bibliography fields. And if you click onto that, you can then scroll down. And when you scroll down, there's a choice that allows you to say when it was accessed. So you can say that it was accessed on 2014. And the month was in October, and the day we did this was on October 3rd. This is again on page 91.
How do I scroll down?
You use the scroll down button. Did you click on the button that says show all bibliographic fields? So you have to click on that first. And then once you do that, you click OK. And what should show up is, it should show up that says Rossi in parentheses. And then after the parentheses, because it's the end of a sentence, we can put in a period. On page 91 at the bottom, it says that we want to put in one more sentence on there. External fingerprint readers usually plug into a USB port to save on desk space. Some laptops include built-in fingerprint readers. Question, yeah.
I have a question. In case I want to edit the citation, how can I do that?
Yeah, so if you want to edit the citation, we're going to actually be editing the citation later on, but since you asked, I'll tell you right now. One of the things you can do is you can click onto the citation itself, and you could click on to edit citation if you want to edit the citation, but most likely you want to edit the source. So the citation means you want to edit the actual citation, and you probably don't want to do that. What I think you probably meant is that you want to edit the source. So to edit the source, you would choose edit source, and then you can change the content in the source. And in fact, in a little bit, we're going to do that because it turns out that the title isn't really understanding how to use fingerprint readers. It's titled something else, but we don't find out about that until later on in the assignment. Just as a, next week on, All right. At this point, I'm going to stop. So I want to save my document. So I want to do File Save. And when we are saving this, again, I want to save this. In my case, I want to save this on my computer. And I want to save it in my Mark Branham super duper awesome stuff. And we are titling this. I kind of forget what we wanted to title this. Let me look it up real fast. Assignments. This is supposed to be titled Chapter 2. It is, oh good, I didn't say what it was supposed to be titled, so excellent. So that means that I can make it up on the spot. So we want to title this Your Name. So I'm going to call it the Branham Mark Access Granted. You want to call it research paper, that's fine too, but make sure your name is on it somewhere. And then, so if you brought a thumb drive and you want to save it on your thumb drive, that's an excellent place to save it. You just want to save it temporarily on your desktop, you can save it on the desktop. But at some place you want to save your document.
Sorry, what was the name?
Your Name and then Access Granted. All right. At this point, I want to show you one more totally cool, super awesome thing about Microsoft Word. And in fact, this thing that I'm about to show you is in fact my all-time favorite thing that you can do in Word. Now, I know I've said that before, but this one is, but there will be other favorite things that I think are favorite. I think I told you last time, my daughter hates that about me, that I like to have lots of favorite things. But the shiny thing I want to show you right at the moment is I've created this little page in Canvas called, where are we? Not styles. Using autocorrect to automatically enter text that you often use. And so the cool thing about Microsoft Office is that they have the thing called autocorrect. And we've already seen it. If you misspell a word and it knows what you meant, or it has a pretty good idea as to what you meant, it'll just change it. So if you misspelled that as TH, TA or something like that, it should figure that out and spell it as THAT. Or the example I give here is that you misspell about, and it will automatically change it to about. But it turns out that you can do anything. So to do this, you can go on the File button. And by the way, when you click on the File button, don't panic that everything looks like it goes away. It really didn't go away. When you click on the File button and you click on to Options, then what you want to do is you want to go into Proofing. And in Proofing, you want to go to Autocorrect Options. And on the Mac, the way this is done is by going on Word and then going down to Preferences. And then under Preferences, going to the autocorrect, which is inside of authoring tools or something like that. And when you're in autocorrect, there's a little thing down at the bottom that says replace text as you type. And it shows you what all of the default stuff is. So all the stuff that's already in there is in there. So for example, if you do a C enclosed in parentheses, it automatically will change that to a, it'll automatically change that to a copyright symbol. Or one of my favorites is that if you do a colon and then a parentheses, it'll automatically turn into a smiley face. Now, if you actually wanted colon parentheses, all you have to do is do an undo, so Control Z, and it will change it to a colon and a parentheses. So if you don't want the auto thingy, you can undo it, and it won't force it. But let's say, in here I say, you know, what if you always have to type in San Jose City College? Because, you know, I work at San Jose City College, so I have to type in San Jose City College a lot. It's lame to type in San Jose City College all the time. Well, what you can do is you can go into your settings. So again, File Options and Proofing, Autocorrect Options, and you can put in Replace, and you make up what you want it to be. So in my case, I think I said SJCC. So I said SJCC is going to automatically change itself to San Jose City College. Now, because I've done that a whole bunch, I want to do something else. So I'm going to say, I want to change MB, or maybe MW, Mark William Branham is what I currently have. I want to change that to not say Mark William Branham, so I'm going to delete that one. And I'm going to say MWB is going to be changed to Mark Branham is the coolest guy ever. He's just darn super duper awesome and a really cool dude. There we go. Yeah, he's great. Exclamation point. Add. So there it is. So now if I click OK and I click OK and I go over here and I type in MWB and I hit space, boom. And if I wanted to come in again, MWB, boom. And then, you know, MWB, boom. So if you ever have to write like the same thingy over and over and over and over again, this is the way to do it. And then this will be saved across all of the Microsoft Office applications that you use. So if you do it in Word, it should show up in PowerPoint. If you do it in PowerPoint, it should show up in Excel and so on. So in real life, I have it set up so that, you know, although, you know, Mark Branham is the coolest guy ever, I really have it set up so that anytime that I type in SJCC, it automatically changes to San Jose City College. Now, if I actually want it to be SJCC, again, I can just do an undo and it will do SJCC. Because sometimes I actually want it to say SJCC as opposed to San Jose City College. So in a little bit, they're going to talk about, or maybe it's next week, they're going to talk, yeah, it's next week, they're going to talk about another method of doing it. I really don't like to use the method that they're going to talk about. I prefer using the autocorrect because I think autocorrect is a much more efficient and better way of automatically having text come out. Questions? Any questions? All right, I think it's time to go ahead and take a little bit of a break. It's what, 7:48? Let's take about a 10, 15-minute break, come back around 8:05. And what we will do when we come back is we are going to put in some more awesome, cool stuff. In addition, we're going to put in some footnotes, and we're going to edit our source, and we're going to put in some we're going to put in some page breaks. It's going to be great. That's going to be what we're going to do when we come back. So I'll stick around. Joel, stick around. If you have any questions, let us know. Otherwise, we'll see you in about 10, 15 minutes.